Hi, I'm Selena, and today I'm going to be doing my favorite standalones list as of the standalones that I've read by the end of 2019. I am not including standalones that I read in 2020 because I want to do an updated standalones video at the end of 2020, including any new favorites that might be on the list. But I want to document this one first because I feel like these books need to be documented whether they stay on the list or not. This is going to be a top 10 list. My series list was like a top 5 list, but I just have so many standalones that I love that I need to do a top 10 list. Let's just get right into it. Number 10 on this list is We're the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson. This book is about a boy named Henry who is dealing with grief that is turned into depression, but due to the death of his boyfriend by suicide. On top of that, he is also dealing with a not great home life, not great school life, just an all-around bad time for Henry. On top of all of that, he is being abducted by aliens who show him a button and tell him, if you press this button, you can stop the world from ending, and if you don't press it, you can sit back and watch it happen. So they put the fate of the earth in the hands of this teen boy who has to decide whether the earth is worth saving when he doesn't even really like his corner of the earth right now. This book is one that I have not read for about 2 years now, I think. Yes, 2 years. The last time I read this book was 2 years ago. I'm going to be reading it again this year. This was my favorite book in high school, in the later part of my high school years. This meant so much to me. It was the first book I ever read that made me change my perception of what YA could do. I had mainly read paranormal romance YA in the past, and I didn't really like it. And so I was mainly just rereading Harry Potter over and over, rereading my favorites, until I found this book. The author came to my school and spoke, and I wanted to prepare, so I read some of his books. This was the second one I picked up, and it affected me so deeply. I loved this book so much. And due to my old love for it, it is on this list. I'm not sure whether it deserves to be here still, but when I reread it when I was 18, I loved it just as much. It held up completely for me. It was still my favorite book. I just highly recommend this book if you like dark contemporaries. This has sci-fi elements, but is really more the structure and feel of a contemporary book with these sci-fi elements thrown in. That is kind of the style that Sean David Hutchinson prefers to write in. Number 9 favorite standalone is It by Stephen King. I loved this book so much. It absolutely blew my mind. This is about, if you do not know, a group of kids who are dealing with this force of evil that often takes the form of a clown in their town. It's about their struggles when they were kids dealing with this thing, and it's about when they are called back to deal with it again as adults. It's a dual timeline, which is something I feel like a lot of people don't tell you before you start this book. This book does need like lots of trigger warnings, which I can put those in a pinned comment if you need to know anything about this book. The things that people know about this book when they haven't read it are interesting, and I knew those things too going in. And all I can say is this book was so much more than I was expecting. The things that I was nervous about made sense to me in the context of this book because this is a horror novel, right? Stephen King is trying to disturb you throughout this entire book, and he does it in such a slow and meticulous way that builds and builds and builds, and it comes out, the disturbing parts of this book come out in mundane ways. It's not necessarily the clown, it's not necessarily the kind of scary disguises that this force of evil uses. It's the forces of evil that affect us in our day-to-day lives. The terrible aspects of human nature are what makes this book horror to me, and that is why I think it is so good, and that is why I was blown away by this book. Let's see, how long is it? It was worth all 1,153 pages in this edition to get to the completion of this magnificent story. This book is slow. Stephen King takes his time with this story, but I never felt bored by it, even when his chapters are long, even when he's doing a lot of character work, because everything was so interesting. I think this book, while it is long and while it is said to be like slower, and because there's a lot of character work happening, that character work is so interesting. And the plot is always moving because it is so intricately tied with this town and the characters in it. Nothing is ever still or stilted in this book, in my opinion. And I just think it is masterfully crafted. But if you are nervous about this book, I do encourage you to give it a try. If you need trigger warnings, check the description. I can give those. Or check the pinned comment and I can give you those. My number 8 favorite standalone currently is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This book is very hyped on YouTube. I'm sure you've heard of it, but if you haven't, this is a story about a girl named Eliza who has a webcomic that she has created. She's done the art, she's done the storyline, and it's very popular online. But her identity is not known, mainly because she has such bad anxiety that as much as she loves her webcomic, it also stresses her out. And so we deal with her navigating the online world as her fame grows, and also dealing with her every day with anxiety. And this book meant so much to me because I related to it so much. I don't know if I would say it's my favorite contemporary anymore, but for the purposes of this list, it is number 8. I love this book so much. I think I would only love it more now since I do more internet-y thing. And I would say that trust the hype with this one because it is worth it. My number 7 favorite standalone is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. So this one grew on me from the first time I read it. I've since reread it and oh my goodness, it's so dark and whimsical and beautiful and just, I love it. I really love it. It is similar to the Disney movie from what I've seen, but it is also very different. It is darker. It is more nonsensical in my opinion. This is a story about childhood, which I love stories about childhood. This is a story about growing up and parenthood, and if you don't know the premise, it's about 3 siblings who are offered a chance to go to Neverland by the eternal child Peter Pan. It's so emotional and whimsical and fun and dark and unexpected for me, and I highly recommend it. It's a great classic. It's a great book. From this point on, basically from number 6 and up, they can kind of switch around. So today, my number 6 choice is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is kind of a classic domestic thriller, and we follow a nameless protagonist as she marries a widower. And she goes to the widower's mansion with him, and she slowly kind of realizes that there's kind of an unspoken obsession with his late wife, Rebecca. And so our main character delves deeper into that, and things go down. And I don't want to tell you much more than that because you can't really know much more than that. But I highly recommend this book. It was engrossing from the absolute start. I was hooked. I knew I was going to love it from the first page. It's just so, so good. It's not a classic that I see recommended that much. It's not read in schools that much, and for the life of me, I don't know why. This is a fun story that I think is perfect for people who don't even really like classics. The writing style is a little bit flowery, and so that can take a bit of getting used to, but this story is so thrilling and fun. And so if you are hesitant about classics and you don't know where to start, the writing style is a bit difficult, I thought, but the story is a great one. My number 5 favorite standalone is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And I still don't even know if this deserves to be number 5. It probably should be higher if I'm being honest, but I don't know. I love all these books so much. They're kind of basically all on equal footing. This is a romance between 2 people who have both a lot of pride and both a lot of prejudice for each other. They're navigating the world of courtship in Regency times. Jane Austen satires her own time. She makes fun of the people in this book. She makes fun of courtship in her own time and has a lot to say about it. So this book is a romance, and it's also a commentary on courtship and the time that this was written. And I think it is absolutely masterful. I highly recommend this book. If you haven't read it, the hype is real and it's worth it. You should totally pick it up. I've seen people who don't like classics pick this up and love it. I will say Jane Austen's writing style is not the most accessible, but if you keep pushing through and pay close attention, it gets easier. And upon reread, it is much, much easier to parse. My number 4 favorite standalone is one that makes me cry, and it's so short, and that is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. This thing is 70-something pages. Let's see how much it is. 76 pages, and it only takes 76 pages to create such a moving story. This is the story about a man who has dementia and is losing his memories and himself. And it's about his family who is watching this happen. So his grandson and his son. And it is about his late wife in a lot of ways. And it's really not a plot-driven sort of story. It's really a situation-driven story or a character-driven story. It's really an exploration of a character who's losing a lot of what their character is. And it's so short, but it is so well crafted and so worth it. It makes me cry. If you can relate to this story, I highly recommend it. It's hard, but it's so, so beautiful. My number 3 favorite standalone is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. If I'm gonna say one Neil Gaiman book is my favorite and on my favorites list, it's gotta be The Ocean at the End of the Lane. It just is so beautiful. It really crept up on me. I had read a bunch of other Neil Gaiman books when I first picked this up. I had read 3 5-stars of Neil Gaiman's in a row, basically, and I had not picked this up yet. And so I picked this up directly after finishing The Graveyard Book, which I loved, and I was not sure whether I was going to love it as much. I just read his middle grade stuff, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, and it was a different tone because it's an adult book, but I loved it. It really took me a bit, and suddenly I just realized that I loved this book so much, and it ended and I was like, this might be my favorite book ever. This is a book about a man who returns to his childhood town for a funeral, I believe, and while he is there, he begins to remember a lot of the dark things that happened in his childhood. It's just, I can't say much more than that because it's so short. This is really where Neil Gaiman shines, in my opinion. I know people love American Gods. I haven't read American Gods yet, but in these kind of short, dark, surrealist fantasy tales, I think is when Neil Gaiman really, really shows his chops. This plot is so intricate, and this book is just so incredibly vivid in my memory. It just stuck with me. It disturbs you and it moves you. This book and all the other books I read by Neil Gaiman have been phenomenal and solidified him as one of my favorite authors ever. And my number 2 favorite book, and this could easily be number 1, so I feel like terrible putting it in number 2, but my number 2 favorite book for now in this list is Emma by Jane Austen. I love Emma. This is a story about a woman named Emma Woodhouse, who is handsome, clever, and rich, and she's not in the power of anyone because she has all of these things. She has her own money, and she is quite self-assured, and she takes it upon herself to play a little matchmaker, be a little matchmaker for all of her friends and the people in her town. But the problem with Emma is her judgment is not always the best, and she's a very flawed character, and so endearing and so fun to follow. This book is so fun from the very start. I loved Emma from the very start. I loved this book. When I read this book again, it feels like I have returned into the story where my heart lies, because Emma has all of it. From what I read, from the 4 books I read, this is my favorite Jane Austen book, not because it's just my favorite and I prefer it, but also because it's the best crafted, in my opinion, and I say that having read Pride and Prejudice, because the plot to me is so intricate, and the clues to it are so intricate. There's a background plot happening, which you don't really get until you reread it, and once you see the clues, and if you can figure out what's going on, it is so worth it and so fun. I adore this book. I just adore it. My number 1 favorite standalone is the one that I've loved since the age of 9 years old when I read it for the first time after My aunt gave it to me for my 9th birthday. That book is, I'm using a different edition because you've seen this book like in 3 different videos, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I'm so sorry, I don't know this man's name, but he wrote a freaking good book. So this book means so much to me. It brings me to tears. It comforts me and just makes me laugh and makes me cry and does all sorts of things to my emotions, and I love it for that. I've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to go on and on about it, but I love this book. You should totally pick it up if you have not. It is a sweet children's book about a little prince who comes from an asteroid and lands in the Sahara Desert and meets a pilot who has also just crash landed recently, and he tells the pilot his story and all the things that he's learned on his way to Earth, and it is just so sweet and yet so emotional, and I love it. I love it so much. The book lift to end all book lifts. I'm Selena. These are my favorite standalones as of now. I will see you in my next video. Thank you for watching this one. Bye!